Hi, friends, and welcome to week 3 of Dreaming the World. This is the week of Europe, and there are 51 countries in Europe, so it's impossible to select one film that would represent the entire continent. So let's let go of that idea. As always, I'm putting some recommendations of films to watch from across the continent, but what we're going to do this week is go to Ireland, which makes sense. It's a place I know the most about. And we're going to watch a film called I Am Belfast. I think this is an amazing film. It's made about 10 years ago and by a wonderful guy, Mark Cousins, who's a dear friend of mine and someone I find inspirational. He's 10 years older than me. He grew up in Belfast, moved to Scotland for college, and he's been there ever since, although he's always all around the world, making films, telling stories, and I think trying to, maybe you could call it making sense of the world. Maybe you could just call it making something creative out of your experience of the world. He has a 15-hour-long documentary about the history of cinema called The Story of Film. And what he did with that documentary was he decided to look at moments in the history of cinema where innovation happened. And he also committed himself to not overplay Hollywood cinema as if it's the only cinema that's available to us. And he also wanted to aim to make a film without cliche in it, and I think he succeeded. Of course, you don't have to watch it in one 15-hour sitting. You can break it up. His next film was called Women Make Film, and it's 16 hours long, and I believe it has something like 1,000 clips in it from movies, all of which were directed by women. Mark is a really imaginative, humane guy, and what he did with I Am Belfast was he got a street map of all the streets in the city, and then he walked every single street within the Belfast metropolitan area. He loves to walk. Walking creates a kind of contemplation that is rare. And out of that came this essay film about Belfast, in which, excuse me, he represents Belfast as a 10,000-year-old woman, which is a better idea than most ideas. And the idea of Belfast being a person, and not just being a generic person or not being a kind of a default man, the way that we often associate, well, let's say the great figures of history narrative is subject to misogyny and sexism, and the story of women and people at other who experience their gender in across the gender spectrum have obviously been downplayed. And so I think Mark wanted to imagine a feminine image for Belfast. There's actually an amazing sculpture at the mouth of the city centre of a woman holding a disc in her hands, very tall. The idea was to have a feminine image greet the city and I guess represent the city. The images that have been most closely associated with Belfast, or at least most loudly associated with Belfast, have been, well, just that, noisy ones, angry ones, aggressive ones, alpha masculine ones. Now, not only is that dangerous for the way people experience their own lives, it's also not true, because many of the people associated with Belfast and with the north of Ireland in poetry, in music, in theatre, in filmmaking, and in political activism are incredibly creative, courageous people who sacrificed for the common good. They weren't belligerent, they weren't aggressive, they didn't throw firebombs. They were the kind of warriors who go into the fire with the vulnerable in order to rescue the vulnerable. Not the kind of warriors who start fires just because they want to burn things down. My Belfast was dominated by a story of separation, of scapegoating, of selfishness, and of aching loss for centuries over who got to have a stake in the society and who didn't. We've been evolving out of that for a long time now. And one of the things that has helped us evolve out of it has been path makers like Mark Cousins, who chose to tell a different story about this city, this beautiful city, this broken city, this aching city, this city with a whole lot of gifts. When you watch it, first of all, I want to let you know there's a couple of pieces of archive footage of bomb explosions in the city that when I first watched it was a bit jolting to me because it reminded me of painful things that I had been on the fringes of. But I do think it's really worth sticking with it and watching the whole thing and watching it in one sitting because it becomes a meditative exploration. And there's a story that happens toward the end, a little grace note, a beautiful vignette about a woman on a bus. And the film doesn't tell you this, but that woman is actually Mark's mother. It's a true story about something beautiful that happened to Mark's mother. I invite you to watch it both as a way of thinking about Belfast, a city that you've heard of, maybe you've visited, maybe some of you on the course are from there. But also at two other levels. One is to think about it as a film and what's Mark doing to shape this narrative. This is, often referred to as a documentary, but documentary is a very broad church, as it were. There are documentaries that are like a History Channel or a Biography Channel, step by step, telling of a story about an incident that has happened in the past, or telling a story about somebody's life from the past, or somebody who's a public figure today, where in their kind of most superficial forms, the filmmaker knew everything they wanted to say before they started shooting any film or any digital footage, and nothing surprised them as they went. There are some very good things. But for some very good documentary films that do that. Then there are documentaries where the filmmaker didn't know what they were going to say and they didn't know what was going to happen while they made the film. And so serendipity, surprise, and perhaps even tragedy occurred in the making of the film. And you can feel the surprise unfolding in the movie. And sometimes that's a very powerful experience of cinema, and sometimes you sort of feel like it's being faked or contrived by the makers. Those are two, I think, the two primary kinds of documentary: the story that was already known that the maker wants to tell visually, and the story that they might know a little bit about. They just want to follow a person or a community or a place, and then something surprising unfolds in the making of the film. Then there's a third kind, and that's what we would call a video essay. And that title, video essay, can be a way of damning something with faint praise. To me, it's like philosophical memoir. And what Mark is doing with this film is crafted nonfiction. I believe it's a beautiful piece of cinema. I've seen it on a big screen several times. He shot some of the footage himself, but he also worked for some of the time with Christopher Doyle, who's one of the greatest cinematographers in the world. He's the regular cinematographer of the amazing filmmaker Wong Kar-wai, who made In the Mood for Love, one of the greatest films of the century. So it looks beautiful, it feels interesting, it's a bit scrappy, and I think you learn a whole lot about filmmaking itself in watching it. Then at the other level, I want to invite you to watch it, is to think about your own city. Think about your own town. Think about where you're from. And ask yourself two questions. One is, what would it be like to get a street map and walk every single street of the city? And maybe even to gather a community of people who would walk those streets together over a period of time. What might you discover about your city and about yourself? And secondly, what's the story you would tell about your city if you were making I Am Bloomington or I Am Singapore or I am Asheville, North Carolina, or wherever you're from. And with all that in mind, I hope you have a wonderful experience watching this wonderful film by this wonderful person, Mark Cousins, and I am Belfast.